Well, I'm getting around to a viewer request from quite a while ago, sorry, but here we go. A Bucheimer Texan on the left versus a Gonzales 415 on the right. The Texan is a vintage, it's definitely a used specimen from back in the day, and the 415 is a reproduction. As a reminder, the Texan was sold nationwide and was probably as popular a flat sap as there was in the heyday of these weapons, while the Gonzales was a regional thing, very small, made by one man and a few partners, Officer Bob Gonzales of the Los Angeles Sheriff's Department. Now, despite the very limited footprint of the Gonzales, these are still the two most notable large saps that there were, and that's why it's going to be interesting to compare them. They were both about 11 inches long, so for a pocket weapon, quite big. Now you can tell by sight easily that the 415 is heavier, usually 20 to 23 ounces, which is a lot for any one-handed impact weapon, and the Texan was about half that. And here, for comparison's sake, is a Bucheimer 211, one of my favorite antiques. And you can see that's a more typical size for a sap or a jack, and you can see how it's just absolutely dwarfed by either of the other two. Let's focus on the handles, the gripping portion of both the Texan and the Gonzales for a minute. Here's the Gonzales, the thickest sap you'll ever own or handle. Remember, this whole comparison we're doing is in a historical context, so today you can get a custom maker to make you one like this or thicker, but back in the heyday of these weapons, the Gonzales line, the overall one, had four, really three were just practical, as I've talked about in other videos. They were the extreme of thickness. Now there's an optical illusion actually going on here with the Texan, which of course is below. That picture includes the strap, right, the retention system, the loop, which I can't remove for the picture, so it makes it look considerably thicker than it is. So once you subtract that, then you realize how much thinner the Bucheimer Texan is. And now let's move on to the business end. So here's the Texan. It's a hard-loaded sap, right? So it has a pot of solid lead, and it's, traditional dimensions. It's an extra long weapon as a sap, but yeah, it's about as flat as a flat sap typically is. And then for comparison purposes, we get to the Gonzales, which, as Todd Foster of Foster Impact Devices says, is more like a Coke bottle. And he's right. Like in my book, I say that they're basically a traditional bludgeon that happens to be a sap. So the 415 has a lot more metal where it counts. But it's a soft load. That's loose metal shot. Now, loose is a misnomer, though. It's, tightly packed. However, like with any soft sap, you do get some shifting of the contents upon impact, which completely changes the physics of what's going on. It provides more penetrating, concussive force, I guess is maybe one way to describe it. Of course, I've talked about this in the past, but check out the payload there. The other thing about the Gonzales is that was really unique in the history of these kinds of weapons is notice how long the striking surface is. Like, you have a lot of space to hit with. With a traditional flat sap like the Texan, it looks like it has a long striking surface as well, but it really is about the size of your thumb, the maximum effective striking area, because that's the size of the lead pod. And because it's solid, this one hits more like like a hammer, basically, as opposed to, say, a sandbag. Now, it is a flat sap, and it has that wide striking surface to help, this was the original intention, to help distribute the impact and go a little bit easier on the person. So, think of it as a flattened hammer if you want, but still, the point stands in comparison to the dynamics of the Gonzales. Lastly, both of them have flat spring steel, basically flattened, flexible metal in the handles. So they have that springiness, which of course is a hallmark of the flat sap in general. There are exceptions, of course. So here's the 415. And you can see, at least with this specimen, the load does get left behind somewhat, and then have to catch up in that classic manner. And that's a bit of a surprise with, 7 layers of leather in the handle. One of the many, many interesting things and, fairly unique things about these weapons is that they change over time, right? Like leather, just like your shoes, gets more flexible, more pliable over time. This one here is not a well-worn specimen, though. I've had it for years, but I don't swing it a lot. Now let's try the Texan for comparison, and you'll see it's more flexible, but not by a huge margin, but noticeably so. So I think it's got more of that springiness if you time it right. It's going to help provide some extra pop, and it's also going to be a quicker weapon to swing overall because it weighs about half what the 415 does. So does any of this make a difference when you're actually hitting something? That's what we're about to find out. And I really wasn't sure what I would see or feel as a result. We'll go with the Texan first. It's an antique, so I'm trying not to abuse it too much. And let's try the 415. Yeah, I'd say more driving force, but to be honest, I think I started swinging harder and harder as I progressed with the 415, and it being a new one, I felt okay doing that. Now we'll try some light edge strikes. Obviously, the Texan has a reduced striking surface that way compared to the Gonzales, and that means it would, probably cut more effectively. And a couple of backhands. Both of those felt really good. I think that's a very effective and, somewhat unexpected strike. And on repeated strikes, both of them kind of work rhythmically. I thought the Gonzales might not do that as well, but they felt about the same. So let's talk retention systems, because the two weapons have very different ones. This is not the number one selling point of the Gonzales line of saps. The long loop, it looks really cool, but, you can do that like I've shown on other types of weapons. At least on my hand, though, it doesn't fit quite right. But it's just got this long trailing thing. It's not entirely practical. That's the reason a lot of officers back in the day did this. You shorten it up a lot and give yourself just a finger loop to help aid in drawing it out of the pants pocket. So it's not really a combat retention system then. I mean, if the weapon does start to slip from your hand, I guess, that cordage would theoretically help, right? Aid with a little bit of friction. But this traditional strap is much more effective. You are not going to lose this weapon while swinging it. And remember, these things are leather, and if your hand's a little bit sweaty, I mean, they are slippery. A flat sap is great because it slips in and out of a pocket easily. So, and just as a historical exercise, of course, which is the better choice? Well, I mean, it depends. Bottom line is the Texan is probably the faster, easier to carry, and more versatile of the two. To me, its hard load and greater flexibility, combined with lighter weight, all means that it makes up for the lack of bulk that the 415 has on its side. Gonzales saps, or Gonzales style saps, I guess I should say, he passed away in 2018, sadly, and it stopped making them long before. They'll always be popular with collectors and users because they just look and feel awesome. And it does have more of that driving force, like we saw. It's more of that knock you off your feet kind of a feel. So that's my comparison of the two preeminent old school heavy artillery saps. I hope you enjoyed it.